welcome the coming together of East Woodstock and the First Congregational Church, and we're so glad you're here. Whether we worship in person or online, all of us are welcome in God's presence. Thank you to Nancy Duchamp, Rick Lamar, and Mike Glinsky for providing our music today. And as a reminder, we're going to continue worshiping at 9 a.m. through the first Sunday in September. Our greeters today are Deb Kirk and Dory Scranton. Let us quiet our hearts and prepare for worship. Holy God, source of all being, you are greater by far than our human thoughts can comprehend. With all that you have created, you abide, weeping with us in grief and pain, rejoicing with us in life and love. You are everywhere in this very moment, holding the entirety of living experience. As we listen for your word, weave us ever deeper together in the great and intricate tapestry of all humanity and all of creation. Amen. Our reading is from the Gospel of John, chapter 4, verses 5 through 29 from the Inclusive Bible. Jesus, weary from the journey, stopped at a town in Samaria. It was around noon. The disciples went to the town to buy provisions, and Jesus sat down by Jacob's well. A Samaritan woman came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." The woman replied, "You're a Jew. How can you ask me, a Samaritan, for a drink?" Since Jews had nothing to do with Samaritans. Jesus answered, "If only you recognize God's gift and who it is that is asking you for a drink, you would have asked him for a drink instead, and he would have given you living water." She challenged Jesus, "Where do you expect to get this living water? You don't have a bucket, and this well is deep." Jesus replied, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but those who drink the water I give them will never be thirsty. No, the water I give will become fountains within them, springing up to provide eternal life." The woman said to Jesus, "Give me this water so that I won't grow thirsty and have to keep coming all the way here to draw water." As their conversation deepened, Jesus revealed his knowledge of her personal life. She responded, "I can see you're a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you claim that Jerusalem is where God ought to be worshipped." Jesus told her, "The hour is coming when you'll worship God neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You worship what you don't understand. We worship what we do understand. Yet the hour is coming, and is already here, when real worshipers will worship God, who is spirit, in spirit and truth. Indeed, it is just such worshipers whom God seeks." She then spoke of the coming Messiah, and Jesus revealed that he is the Messiah. The disciples, returning at this point, were shocked to find Jesus having a private conversation with a woman. But no one dared to ask, "What do you want of him?" or "Why are you talking with her?" The woman left her water jar and went into the town, saying to the people, "Come and see someone who told me everything I have ever done. Could this be the Messiah?" At that, everyone set out from town to meet Jesus.
What stood out for you from that reading? There's a lot in that reading. There's an awful lot in that reading. It's a really rich reading, but what, did anything catch your attention? Did anything stand out for you? What stood out?
That she went back to town as a woman and people listened to her.
Right, so the Samaritan woman went back to town and people actually finally paid attention to her. Wow, 2,000 years ago, if only today. What else? What else? What else?
Unconditional love. The water would be, she would need it because it'd be ongoing.
The living water, unconditional love. Wonderful. What else stood out?
God is spirit, and those that worship him in spirit and truth.
God is spirit, and the true way for us to worship is in spirit and truth. It's not about that place or this place.
In that translation, it didn't go into the whole business that Jesus told her about her having been with other men. It just skipped right over.
Yeah, there's more to the story. Absolutely. He goes into detail about her personal life and 5 husbands and you're with somebody. Yeah. So there's more to the story.
Having heard it a number of
And the inflection for the reader, that was fabulous, Val. Anything else?
I like the give and take. It's kind of edgy
Yeah,
between the two.
there's give and take in there. Anybody else? Yeah.
And not only that she was a woman, but that she was a Samaritan who they looked at as much lower than themselves. So
Yeah.
they were spoken to her because of that.
Right, all of these differences. Anything else? There are so many things in this. So you've touched on some of them. The first thing that I want to touch on is the very beginning. Jesus is weary. Have you ever been weary on your journey? I know I've been weary on my life journey. Jesus is weary on the journey. The actual translation of the word that's used for weary, it can mean physical weary. So he's just been, going here and there. Jesus is always going here and there with his disciples. I have to imagine that he was actually pretty fit because they're always on the move from this place to that place. But on this particular day, we're told that it's about noontime, and Jesus is weary. The word there can also mean that you can be heavy burdened by all of the expectations and the requirements of others. That's part of the way that we live our lives, right? Trying to live our lives based on what everybody else is expected or what we think is expected or the perceptions that we want people to think about because we have all these burdens from the world and all of the messages that we're getting from social media and from our friends or our supposed friends or the people who like our Facebook posts, right? We're living based on all of those expectations of what is good and what is right. It can be exhausting. It can be absolutely exhausting. The great popularity contest that we each live in our own way, it can be incredibly wearying and heavy burden. There's also the whole perception of what's right from a religious perspective. I mean, he finds himself on the journey because immediately prior to that, if you read the handful of verses that begin just before the story where we picked it up, it's because the Pharisees found out that he was having more converts and his disciples were baptizing more people than even John the Baptist, and they weren't too thrilled about John the Baptist and what was going on there. And so there's all of this backstory about the reasons why Jesus may be burdened, and I think that we can each relate to that. And for me, the good news is this: if Jesus is wearied on the journey, Jesus, God in Christ, can relate to each and every one of us when we find ourselves one way or another wearied on the journey, from the perceptions or the expectations, or just because sometimes it gets really hard navigating the deep, dark valleys that we find our lives sending us through. And yeah, Jesus challenges so many different social conventions in this little story. There's the question about the Samaritans versus the Jewish people, and about whether the place to worship is in Jerusalem or on this hill, or whether, oh my gosh, he actually interacts with a woman. Not only that, Jesus chooses to go in this direction. There's actually a word in there that actually says that Jesus, it was necessary for Jesus to go through Samaria to get from Judea to Galilee. Now, what we know from a historical concept is that for the Jewish people of the time, in order to adhere to their religious protocol and try to keep themselves clean and not defile themselves or be considered unclean, that they would actually go the roundabout way. They would not pass through Samaria, because the animosity between the two peoples was so much at the time that to even walk on the roads that a Samaritan walked on would make them be considered unclean. And so people who are adhering strictly to the religious practices of the day and the social conventions of the day, they would have gone the roundabout way. But Jesus found it necessary to pass through Samaria. I think that says everything about who God is and who Jesus is and who we are called to be. If you notice, over and over and over and over and over again, throughout the Jesus stories, I can count at least 11 or 12 times just in the Gospel of John, we see Jesus encountering someone who is somehow considered an other. Encountering someone who is strange or different or estranged. It begins with the call of his first disciples. Nathaniel, when he's called, right? The question is, this rabbi, this Jewish rabbi, comes from Nazareth, and the response that Nathaniel gives is, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" It's like immediately, because of who Jesus is and where Jesus is coming from, even though Jesus is coming from Jewish territory, the whole perspective of that little small backwater town is nothing good can come from there. And when we say nothing good, they also mean no one good could come from there. All of these perceptions, all of these social conventions, what we find in this story and story after story after story, not just in the Jesus journey, but I think throughout the Hebrew scriptures and the Christian scriptures, is that God is ever at work trying to open us up and challenge us to wipe away the human conventions that keep us separate and keep us apart. That's what this story is all about. It's why he has to go into Samaria, because he needs to disrupt the social conventions of his time. He needs to show the disciples, the people who are trying to learn this way of love. We, disciples, he's trying to also show us, people who are struggling to figure out in this day and in this age, how do we live the way of love? That the way of love is found not by us staying comfortable back at home, comfortable with our own people, comfortable with everybody who thinks the way that we think, comfortable with the news that only filters things out so that it agrees with us and that we agree with it. But for us to truly be the people of God is for us to use our gifts and use our presence in order to break down those barriers, to risk crossing the threshold and encountering someone that we consider another. Because it's in that space of uncertainty. It's in that space where true transformation happens. Not just transformation for the person who may encounter, but transformation deeply within our own hearts and within our own lives. And if there is an essence and an aspect of this Christian story, which I believe that we have lost over the 2,000 years that has happened since Jesus, it is precisely this. Why is the world so fragmented? Why have we as a nation become so mean? Why are there people who say that they claim to identify with this God who is love, and yet we act in ways that are so unloving? This is our call for this time. And for me, when you look at this story, you can look at so many other stories. I mean, think about Jesus' encounter later at the end of the Gospel of John. The resurrected Jesus encounters the disciples in a locked room, and there's one disciple who's not with them, right? It's Thomas. And then he comes later, and what? Jesus doesn't hold it against him that he doubts. Jesus is like, come, here. This is my body, here. There's reconciliation. Even when we think things that are different, even when we are so sure, or we need to see the proof, God is yet with us on the journey. The whole talk about the living water. You know, for me, this is what's really critical. And for us to try to figure out how do we learn to be humanity in these times that are so challenging, and when we as a society are so inhumane to one another, it is for us to look beyond all of the identity markers that we have, and for us to find the common things within the human condition that we share together. Jesus is weary and Jesus is tired, and Jesus is thirsty. The woman who comes to the well, I have to imagine, she's there for a reason. She's on the margin of society based on her familial relationships and her questionable history. She's on the margin of society, and she's out at the well because she is thirsty. Give me this living water that you're talking about so that I will never thirst again. There's this shared sense of a common need which transcends all of the divisions. It's not about whether Jesus is Jewish or she's a Samaritan, whether he's a guy and she's a gal. It's about seeing beyond all of that fear in order to relate in the most personal, in the most humane, in the most sensitive, in the most loving way. This is the journey. This is the journey. You know, Rick Steves. Anybody know who Rick Steves is? Big travel guru, right? Right? Lots of stuff on NPR, and he's got travel books, and he does tours now, right? He says that the opposite of fear is understanding. And for me, I want to push that a little bit further. I think understanding comes from love. The opposite of fear is love. And through that is understanding. But nonetheless, I get his point. And he says the only way to understand life and the world better is to expand our horizons. Well, a travel guru would say that, wouldn't he? But he says he travels and he understands different experiences and differences about people and what we share in common because he's come in contact with so many people who are different. It is the experience of people who are different that has helped him to understand how we are also the same, and also to help him to understand more deeply what he appreciates about the culture from which he comes, as well as the unique aspects, the gifts of difference that those different cultures and different people that he interacts with around the world bring. What if that were the way that we approached our journey? What if that were the way that we approached our life? What if we were able to find the comfort? Remember last week we talked about the fear. The first step on the journey is to cross the threshold. And the reason a lot of us don't cross the threshold is because fear holds us back. Remember what we said. Can we hold on to the hope that we get from like Psalm 121? Right? This is the God. God is the God of love who is with you every step on the journey. God is the one who keeps you and holds you. And you are a child of the living God. That's where your identity is found. And yet it's not easy. We step out across that threshold and we're going to encounter, we don't know who we're going to encounter. And when we encounter something or someone that is different from us, it can cause us fear. And we want to go back to the safety of our assumptions, of our comfort, of everything that we know about the way we think the world is supposed to work. We all go through this. And there's this incredible little process that we actually see that happens. And I think that it's informative for us about how can we interact with people that are different. Look at the steps that we find. And I can tell you that this happens over and over again in my own life. The place that we begin is this question about loss and fear and distrust. Right? The Samaritan woman. Like, who are you to talk to me? Right? Her initial reaction of seeing somebody who identifies as Jewish and she being a Samaritan, she instantly goes to that place of fear and worry and doubt. Dismiss him before he dismisses her. We react out of the place of fear instead of being able to be comfortable and confident in who we are and to be present with one another in those times of challenge. You know, a couple of weeks ago, some of you know, I spent a week at a silent retreat. Now, I've done silent retreats before, but they were always silent retreats wrapped around some sort of planned program. So there were like 4, 5, 6 hours of programming, and then it was like silent in the evening after dinner until the next morning. And that was kind of safe. But this time, for a lot of different reasons, I was weary on the journey. And so in conversation with my spiritual director, I arranged to go on a silent retreat. And I was going to go to this monastery. And that was great, but it also filled me with a whole bunch of anxiety. So much so that the day that I left, I drove really slowly and meditatively to go there. Because I was so anxious about getting there, I was not anxious about driving there. It's this idea about loss and fear and the unknowing. Oh my gosh, right? I grew up in congregationalism. I'm white Protestant guy in this church, and I'm going to a monastery for silent retreat for a whole week. I have no idea what it's going to be like. I was filled with fear. These differences, all the assumptions, all the questions, I have no idea. But then what happens? The first step that happens is this first interactions. Right? You see the first interactions with Jesus. They're talking about superficial things. First it's about the bucket, and it's about the water, and it's about the practical thing. That's kind of the third thing. When I arrived on Monday afternoon, one of the monks showed me my room, and then at 5 o'clock, everybody on retreat, we're going to gather, and he just kind of explained what the week was. Well, so we had these first superficial interactions. It wasn't as strange anymore. Got a map of the facility, and I was told what the times were for prayer and everything, and we were invited but not expected to go and whatever. And so you deepen, and as you deepen, the fear lessens, your anxiety is a little bit less, and you can be a little bit more present. And so Jesus and the Samaritan lady, they start to talk, and then he starts to share a little bit of personal information about what he knows. and why probably life is such a challenge. And then the conversation deepers. As we are exposed to one another, we go from the superficial and the neutral kind of thing. We're able to get deeper and build trust in conversation and in relationship. And so on my week, I started going to the prayer time, right? The monks keep prayer. They sing the prayers. It's absolutely gorgeous. 6 times a day, you're invited to come to worship if you really want. But it's not expected. And so I started going. And of course, it was different, right? In the first couple of times, I was worried. I had no idea. Like, when do you bow? When do you cross yourself? When do you stand? When do you sit? None of that's explained. It's all assumed. It's not my tradition. I was filled with fear. But time and time again, by going and watching others, and sometimes, right, the people who grew up Catholic, they didn't know when to stand. They were thinking about something else. But over time, I learned that we could depend upon one another, and we could watch, and we could work. And you know what? If you sat when you were supposed to stand, or you forgot to cross yourself, nobody was bothered. All that fear went away. All of the worry went away. And as the time went by, we got together once a day for a 45-minute conference. It was like Bible study. And we were able to talk a little bit and learn a little bit and come together in the shared understanding of we were there in order to be prayerful and to be in the presence of the living God. Didn't matter what our background was. Didn't matter whether I was Catholic or not Catholic. Didn't matter whether I was a monk or not a monk. Didn't matter whether I knew the traditions or when to stand or when to bow myself. The common goal of just being present to worship the living God and to be present allowed me to move beyond the fear and for us to grow deeper in our shared understanding. Didn't matter where we're coming from. And that's what happens with Jesus and the Samaritan woman. And I believe over and over and over again, that's what can happen within our own lives when we start from a place of our common humanity and our shared experience. In fact, not only that, I believe that the transformational process, which is the spiritual journey, which is about us growing deeper in relationship and understanding with ourselves and with others, with creation, and with our Creator, is found in these transformational places where all of our assumptions from history are broken open and we continue to grow in the bigger, greater understanding of this God who is love and that we are all siblings in this one human family. Doesn't matter what style of music we listen to. Doesn't matter whether we stand or whether we sit when we pray. All of these things are helpful for us as we come together to celebrate who God is and who God is yet creating and calling us to be. I believe that not only does Jesus move, but living water moves. Living water nourishes us wherever we are when we are thirsty on the journey. Living water washes away and has the potential to wash away all of the fear and all those expectations that we have picked up upon the journey. Living water has the potential to overflow and even break down all of the walls and all of the dams that are holding us back and preventing us from being this one united human family. I promise you, wherever you are on your own journey, wherever you are, the living water is always there that you can tap into. Wherever you are, in the deepest valley or the highest mountaintop, this God is with you wherever you are on the journey. Rick Steve says, you know what I found over time? That those people that I thought were strangers, they're just friends that I haven't yet met. What if we approach the world with that kind of openness and that kind of hope, knowing that wherever you go, God is with you on the journey? Amen.
One of the things that has helped me about the journey is knowing the final destination. So this old hymn has long been one of my favorites, and you are certainly welcome to join in with us if you know it. There's a land that is fairer than day, and by faith we can see it afar, for the Father waits over the way to prepare us a dwelling place is there. In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. We shall sing on that beautiful shore the melodious songs of the blessed, and our spirits shall sorrow no more. Not a sigh for the blessing of rest. In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. To our bountiful Father above, we will offer our tribute of praise for the glorious gift of His love and the blessings that hallow our days. In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore.
Nice work.